We'd like to welcome everybody who is tied in with the LinkedIn Live with us today. Bobby Woods from Scrum Inc. I'm a principal here at Scrum Inc., principal consultant, and I am here with JJ Sutherland. JJ, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Bobby. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking today about why agile transformations fail, which most of them do. Not if you work with us, but but we're seeing a lot of them, but there are common patterns. And so Bobby and I thought that we would, have a discussion about some of the things we've seen because we get asked this a lot by customers, and we thought it might be valuable. So, in your experience, Bobby, you work with. I'm sorry, I can't tell the people you're working with right now because that would be bad. But what are the patterns you see with those struggles? Maybe not failures, but there are challenges in any transformation.
Yeah, there always are, and some of it has to do with where they're coming from and what their backgrounds are, and that kind of thing. So it's never always the same exact thing, but there are definitely patterns that you can see going across different areas. And when you see it, because people ask that question all the time, why are we seeing agile transformations fail when some people have in their mind that agile is some sort of silver bullet that's going to wind up solving all their problems, right? And
it's not magic.
It's not magic. I worked with a company a while ago. We had this it was a magnet that we would give out to different people, and it said, the sooner you figure out that agile is not a silver bullet, it's worth its weight in gold. Right. And it was a great little phrase because people go into it thinking that. But some of the patterns, I'd say one of the first real patterns we see while some of these fail, first of all, even the term failure with regards to an agile transformation is an interesting way to describe it, because a lot of times it's not so much it's a failure for agile to be able to happen. It is more of a quitting trying is what we're seeing. And that's different. It's not that it was happening really well and then it just failed, or everything just kind of went a really good way and it just failed. It is that we've stopped trying to change. And that's really the parts.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I find it odd when people talk about the failure of agile transformation. I think that what really fails is, are you able to do what you set out to do?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I always say, I'm a radical pragmatist to use Agile or Scrum or whatever. But as long as you're doing what you want to get done, are you delivering faster? Are you responding to the marketplace? Are you doing all this stuff? Are you hitting your business goals, which is the most important thing? And so that's where failure comes in. Like, are you achieving the business goals and the business outcomes that you want to have?
That's
now,
right.
Agile is a way to get there. And I think, we both work for a company called Scrum Inc., so we think it's a really good way to do it. But it's one of the things I was thinking about. So I'm doing this new product owner course next week, and one of the things that I was talking to this guy Jeff Johnson, and Jeff Johnson ran the Sentinel project for the FBI in the late 2000s. And the Sentinel project, if you're not familiar with it, the government has spent, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars with some large contractor to build a digital case system to digitize all the FBI case files. After 9/11, they're like, oh, we got to be able to connect the dots. And they tried for like a decade and it didn't work.
Sure.
And so finally, Jeff Johnson brought it in and they did it in-house, and they were able to do it for like $40 million and deliver within a year after spending years not doing it. So it's really an impressive use of Agile. And I had coffee with him a couple of weeks ago, and I said, Jeff, how did you measure success? Because I knew we were going to do this conversation. I was like, well,
Sure.
What was your sort of metric? And he said the metric he used was measuring speed to awareness, which was how fast could one FBI agent in Toledo learn something, and how fast would the rest of the FBI know that?
Something that's important.
Something that's important. And he said what really worked there is because it was able to say to the team, so you could be doing a UI interface, implementation, say, okay, is this going to make this faster to awareness or slower? Is this going to be clunky? Or then you can also go to like the congressional committee that's yelling at you about spending all that money and saying, well, then how we're measuring it is a speed to awareness. So I thought it was a really clever metric that you could use both for internal, as you're looking at your backlog, are these the right stories to do? What is the order of prioritization? Well, what's going to speed that up? And you could also do it to your stakeholders, saying, this is what we're trying to do, and we can measure it, and we can show you how it works. So it's getting that. I think one of the things the point I was trying to make there is that knowing what success is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And a lot of organizations go into it feeling like success in applying agile methods is the number of people that you can get to actually know what this means, right? And they don't have a good view into it. Sometimes they have to rethink their view on how they're going to go about measuring it, to your point. They found something that was really highly impactful that had nothing to do with how many people they trained. It had to do with how they were using the knowledge that they were given. And
Exactly.
and we see that as one of those areas where agile transformations don't wind up getting the traction that people had wished because we're not watching for the right things.
Right. And it's not really making sure everyone understands why you're doing this and what the expected outcomes are. Is you get really into the weeds on, okay, you know, Scrum Masters or product owners or Agile pods or which were you doing safe or the Spotify model or Scrum at scale or whatever, or Kanban. You know, it's like, no. Well, what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
What are you trying to accomplish? And one of the things I think that working with our customers a lot, that's really where we begin is it's great that you want to, you know, do an agile transformation. Why do you want to do it? What are you trying to accomplish? And how are you going to know if you did it or not? What's your measure of success? And I think that's one of the first things I would say to anybody trying to figure that is start that conversation, because we do have conversations sometimes with people who think about becoming customers, and it's, well, we just want to be more agile and faster.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, well, that's great.
Give me my stuff faster. I don't care what you call yourself.
Yeah. And that's just, you know, if you're doing a call center, maybe that's the way to do it. But there are other measures of success. The other thing I see, I wonder what you thought about this, Bob, is that people hate to prioritize, even though they talk about priorities a lot.
That is extremely common. I'd say that's probably one of the top 3 items that leadership is looking for when we work to help them with overall transformations, is getting better at prioritization. And that's one of the hardest hills for them to actually climb themselves oftentimes, because they know they have to get better internally at doing that, but actually having to make the hard decisions, having to weigh 2 things that are both extremely important, but only focusing on one. So we're not doing the context switching and getting that thing faster and what that means. That's a hard thing for them to be able to wrap their brain around oftentimes.
It really is. And but I always tell leaders, like, listen, if you have, you know, 10 top priorities, you have none. Yeah. And the most junior person in your organization gets to decide your strategy, because they get to pick which of those 10 that they want to work on.
Exactly.
Because they're all equally important. That happens every time. And it can be complicated. Like if you're in a large organization that's doing a bunch of different stuff, right? It's not like hey, we have one product, we're getting out the door. You have a portfolio of products, you have, you know, offices all over the world and stuff. So it's not like you can say, you know, all 50,000 people have one priority. You know, they might have an overarching result they want to get of stock price or business value or whatever, but it's sort of, you can't do it. So you're going to have to, you have to figure out a way of splitting up and balancing those priorities, especially across the leadership level, where, you know, one division, this thing is their top priority, but they're dependent on another division where that priority is number 15, and this other division is dependent on them too, and sort of getting those leaders to talk to each other and share what those priorities are and agree that collectively as leadership, this is what we're going to prioritize.
Yeah, you make a huge point right there with regards to the alignment. Because sometimes leaders say, well, no, we don't have a problem with priorities. I know, singular, that the priorities all should be this way. But getting everybody else to agree on that and then continue to talk about any adjustments to those priorities, that alignment is really hard.
It really is. I mean, and the other thing I see with leadership often is they say, well, this is the number one priority, but then they don't talk to their other, you know, their leadership team. And they're like, I understand, boss, that's your number one priority. I totally agree. But, you know, there's this 15 other things that we actually have to do that have nothing to do with that priority, but, you know, they're required by law, or, or we have these other things going on. And if we just do that, like all the keeping the lights on stuff that we do, like, you know, paying people, HR, all these other things you got to do and take capacity and time and energy. And so I would say the other thing that in sort of relations to this prioritization, as you think about it, is make sure you have all the stuff you're doing, because it's really easy to say, oh, this new shiny great thing we're going to go after and it's going to be top priority, and then get really frustrated when it doesn't happen, is because often leadership doesn't have visibility into actually what all the other stuff that has to happen.
Yeah, we worked with one leadership group who had 70 something projects in flight, actually in flight, and they had 7 teams delivering it. And we took these one-pager descriptions of these projects back to the C-suite essentially, and got them all in front of them so they could do that prioritization effort across that group. And what they found is they had no idea what some of these things even were. And their name was on there as the executive sponsor. And so they had to go through this understanding, first of all, what all the work was going on in their areas. To your point, they didn't know what all that work was, and then they could actually go about what is value and what is prioritization.
Yeah, it reminds me of this group at 3M a few years back. I can talk about them because they gave me permission to write about it in the new book. So I can say I have permission. I have permission. But what they did is they actually found, this is part of 3M HIS, which is their health informatics group. And I don't know, a couple thousand people, and they were looking at it, and they said, okay, well, now we're actually going to do, we did exactly what you're talking about. This is something we do all the time at Scrum. So okay, let's actually find out what's going on.
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. And so they said, looked what all these groups are doing, and they found this group of teams, and I feel so bad for these poor people who had been working on something that the market window had passed like 18 months previously.
What a morale killer.
Can you imagine being like, there are like 15, 20 people working on that. It's like, oh my God, you spent the last couple of years of your life doing something with zero value. That is just brutal. But I think that is one of the things that Agile does that is really powerful, is give leadership the transparency to actually see what's going on so you can make those prioritization decisions. So I think that's one of the key enablers that I think oftentimes, again, people just get hung up, and this is one of the things, challenges, I think, they hung up on the Agile terminology or Scrum terms or this or how many teams or what's the scaling. Like, it's like, no, let's just talk about what's being prioritized, what's actually being done. I was like, let's just solve that problem, and we can talk about all the, it's one of our colleagues always says, when I call the plumber, I don't debate the wrench he's using. I want the toilet fixed.
Yeah, and that ties into one of those very, very common patterns we see when we see these failures take place, is that leadership does not do that prioritization to streamline the flow of value down to the teams, the understood things that we should be working on. They just expect them to deliver faster on the larger overall body of work. And it's a complete dichotomy of contrasts there, because they're not going to spin up faster on those larger items. They're just going to context switch more. And then they say she's just not going to work here because they don't put that effort in.
And I think that the other thing I think we see together sometimes is that people don't understand that prioritization is empowerment. People are like, oh, well, that's the boss is telling us what to do and we're Agile, we're empowered. It's like, no. Clear prioritization empowers the teams to get after the work. And they can work to them. Not prioritizing clearly for them disempowers them, which it's a common misunderstanding. I think that, oh, well, a product owner or product backlog, well, that's telling these people, it's telling them what's important.
And like we were talking about with the example you gave, it's also a motivational tool.
Yeah.
People know that they're working on the most important items. I used to work in systems engineering earlier in my IT career, and there was nothing more disheartening than to feel like you had no idea where your work was impacting. You were just doing back-end work, standing things up, and you didn't know what was actually taking place and how you were supporting the larger picture. And so when people have a view into the value they're providing and they know it's the most important things, that's a massive motivator to take accountability for not just the way we're working, but the value we're providing. Yeah.
And to build on that, I think that one of the things that both motivates engineers, motivates people, it's just a common human, is, as you were saying, producing value, doing work of value. And when people just say, hey, let's just get everybody faster, let's just do stuff faster. Well, if you're not delivering stuff, you can get everyone really busy. It's really easy to make people busy, but it's not easy to make sure you get that done, which goes back to sort of what we were talking about at the beginning of why are you doing it? What's the value? How are you going to measure? And then it's got to be, okay, stuff is actually being delivered rather than people spinning and doing stuff and working, but nothing of value is created. You don't have that ability. And that's one of the things that we really focus on here at Scrum Inc. and in the entire Agile community is what's done. What is actually done. And so you have these clear priorities that'll drive that sort of, but if you don't have stuff that's done, up to me, that's because your prioritization is messed up or you have a real technical problem. But, you know, it's sort of like figuring out and don't measure how busy people are, how many hours they're working, unless it's, you know, measure what the value is created and measure that, and then get it to be easier to do that.
Yeah. And another pattern that I see through this that is extremely common is that people don't truly understand the kind of change that's involved in what they're doing. The actual impact of it, the emotional impact, the physical impact, the business impact of that change, and what it takes to do it well. Because that change is hard. And people have, especially with COVID and everything that's gone on around that, people have change fatigue, right? They're at that point where man, if I have something else change in my life right now, I'm going to lose it, right? And so they want things to be more stable, but that's just not the world we live in. So we have to help them get better at being able to change. And that whole change communication and facilitation is one of those items that leadership really winds up needing to lean into as they're going through this.
I was talking to the CEO of one of our customers, and he was leading his company through an agile transformation, and he hit exactly that point. He said the most frustrating thing for him as a CEO, and I'm a CEO and I completely agree with him, is how much you have to repeat yourself and do that change communication, that change management over and over and over and over again, because it is such a gigantic shift for people.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see how when, like, you know, within Scrum Inc., we have a gentleman by the name of Tom Bullock, who's our chief storyteller, and he's amazing. And when he comes into organizations and starts talking about the ability and the concepts around helping people to go through that change, light bulbs start going off and ideas come out and the strategies get created. And the next thing you know, the overall change becomes easier. And they're more willing, right? This kind of ties into oftentimes what we're referred to as the leadership principle, Agile, which is providing people with the environment, support, and trust to be successful as they go through. Well, part of being able to give them that is communicating with them to be able to do it. What's coming? What's the impact to their lives? It builds trust, it builds support, right? We're going to give you the right environment. Those are so key to making sure the people that are impacted by this know what's coming and what that impact is going to be to their lives.
And that's so important, Bobby. I mean, it's so important too, because any organization is its people. So far, we'll see about AI, but it's bringing your people along with you and getting them excited about it. I was talking to another leader at another customer of ours in the UK, and when he's trying to do that change management, and it's a really big organization, a couple 100,000 people. And he's sort of saying, I'm talking to getting people excited about doing this in their area. And one of the things he said is really just talking about what it feels like to be on a high performing team. He said, everyone's had that experience when you're on this amazing, great team. And it clicks and it's fun to go to work and you get great things done. It's just awesome. And in his experience is searching for that, because he said he's been on a bunch of those kind of teams. He's been lucky through the course of his career, but he said this is the first time that he was doing it on purpose. He says every other time it had happened by accident, right? It was just like, oh, this great group of individuals had gotten together, they just clicked, they're able to do great things. But he said what Scrum does from his perspective, one of the ways he sells it is like, you know, that feeling of being on a great team, that's what Scrum is set up to do. And that's the feeling that you get from being on an Agile team. And he says that's how he communicates that positive change to a lot of people who know nothing about Scrum, know nothing about Agile. They know this thing is coming. And of course, they're like, oh God, another management change program. I need another 50 of those that I've had in my career. And he said, and he talks about what it feels like. And that's how he gets people, one of the ways he gets people excited. And I thought that was a really interesting insight.
That is really powerful because we spend so much time at work, more time often for a lot of folks, more time than they get to spend with their family, right, during the week. And we put a lot of emotion into trying to do really good jobs. And there's a feel that goes along with this. We want to feel like we're providing value. We want to feel like we enjoy who we work with, what we're working on, who we're working for. And when we're able to do these things well, bring people in, invite them in to do this, help them to show where value is, have the right prioritization, set a proper sustainable pace that includes excellence and quality, then people feel really good about what they're doing and enjoy their jobs. And we find quite a bit that if they have those things, people sometimes will even be willing to take less money for their jobs because they have the happiness, which Dr. Sutherland talks about all the time. Happy people have better work. When they have that sort of happiness on their teams, then you also get a lot of loyalty to the organization, loyalty to the teams, loyalty to the products. It's a very powerful thing.
It really is. And both you and I recently have been working a lot with people in public service, in the public sector in countries around the world. And, no one's going into the public sector to make bank. I mean, if they are, they really have the wrong, no one joins, we work with the Ministry of Defense in the UK, and I'm like, no one is going to work with the Ministry of Defense as a civil servant saying, I want to claw my way to middle management and crush dreams. Like no, they feel there is a mission and a passion. Or, in the governments that you're working in, it's like one of the things that you were telling me about is that they see better delivery of government services to the citizenry as a responsibility of democracy. That's an obligation. And no one's doing that that's motivated, that's just coin operated, right? That's just not, but they have this such powerful sense of mission and purpose. And it's freeing that up, because then you do run into the people in government who are cynical because they've tried and then the system itself is crushed themselves. And I'm really excited about the work you're doing, freeing that up for people who are committed to public service.
Yeah, and the folks in that area have the same types of passion to try to help out. We went through an exercise with a senior leadership group there who we'd simply ask the question, what are you trying to accomplish? How do you want this work to be described down the road? And the answers they came up with were powerful. They had things like, I want people to want to work here. I want this to be a desirable place to go. I want to impact my family. I want my family to be able to have certain, government provides services better, faster, more clear, better prioritized. Things that really had people impact, that their desire to make things happen was really powerful. Their list was almost emotional when you looked at it. And so those things are inspiring when you see it.
And I think that's really getting back to sort of how we started this with, what are some of the pitfalls of an agile transformation? What are the challenges you can come across? And one of them is, one of the results is to get the business results you want, to get the outcomes you want for citizenry, whatever you want to do, you have to have engaged people. You have to have people who want to work there. You talk to any corporate leader, it's always, how do I attract and retain talent? It's the war for talent. And even in uncertain economic times, really talented people always have options.
And there's a difference between simply talent and agile talent.
Yes.
Some people think this way and some people don't. And so it's hard when you start thinking about bringing people into your organization who might even make you take steps backwards in the journey that you're trying to take. So how we hire is really important in that journey.
It is incredibly important because it's a team sport.
Yeah.
And there are, in an agile transformation, anything you do with teams, individual contributors are great. We all love them, but they don't necessarily all fit into an agile context. They don't. And if you're doing something that requires hundreds or thousands of people, you might want to have some, there are certain specialized things, but you really want to have people who want to work together, that get joy out of working together. I always tell what another sort of pattern, I'm not sure there's a transformation, but this is failure. But I see this in Scrum teams a lot.
Sure.
Which is they'll sort of randomly assign who's going to be a Scrum Master and who's going to be a product owner. And I'm like, you know, you want people who are not only are good at it, but want to do it. Like I always say, I'm a terrible Scrum Master. I'm terrible at it. I'm terrible at it. My skills do not lend themselves to Bobby. You know me, so I'm sure you really. But I'm a really good product owner, and that's just a different mindset. Both of those are needed to add value to a Scrum team. Both are needed in an organization, but you want people who are passionate about it.
Right.
You know, passionate Scrum Master and Agile coach. Those people are worth their weight in gold, and they do a job I am horrible at.
I was working with one retail organization who they asked me right out of the gate, who should we have as our Scrum Masters? And I said, well, before you start throwing names on roles and things like that, let's kind of walk through with the groups some of the things we're going to be doing and some of the training. And part of the training we put into place helps to actually see what people really grab onto it. And as they were going through, I asked the senior leadership, just kind of watch what happens. And sure enough, there was somebody that stood out. Nobody asked them to do it. They started to kind of facilitate getting everybody going and motivating and making sure people had what they needed on the same page. Nobody asked them to, and they were not a project manager. They were a developer. They were a programmer. And I said, take a look at that person and what they're doing. They said, we never saw that coming. But they were passionate about it. And so they asked them if they'd be interested in being a Scrum Master. And they said, you know, yeah, I'd like to give it a try. He wound up being a senior Scrum Master, growing their community of practice there, and it increased his career. And now he had the technical experience and the facilitation. It was fantastic. He got raises and all sorts of stuff. So it's really cool to see that happen when people have the passion to do it. But you're right. What we refer to as an anti-pattern in going through and doing this is when we just kind of grab people who we think might fit the role, give them the role, and at the end of the day, they really didn't want it. They see no path with it in their own lives. And so there's just not the energy there to try to make it successful.
And I would add to that it's the same thing on the product owner side, because often leadership's like, I'm going to be the product owner. I'll tell you, I'm not a product owner.
And where can we find a subject matter expert? They'll
Or that, like, it's so. I was just thinking about this one group I'm working with right now, where there are a bunch of senior people in this team, but they had a lot of external obligations, right? You know, they had to do a lot of, outward facing interactions, which is part of the reason the team existed. They didn't have time to run the backlog. And so they actually took a pretty junior person and made them product owner, gave them a lot of feedback about what the priorities were, about what, why we were doing. But that person was the one who said, okay, this is what the backlog is going to look like. This is how we're prioritizing, this is how we're ordering all of this stuff. Because another failure pattern is when someone who's too busy, and most senior leaders are too busy to fill the role of product owner, because product runner is a full-time job.
Yep.
And so that is a thing. And it doesn't mean that you're not setting priorities or influence. You're a stakeholder. Your opinions are very important. And they might actually even report to you in some levels. I mean, the reporting structures on them, that can get really complicated. We don't want to get into that. But you want to make sure that someone in the role, just like in a Scrum Master role, someone in a product owner role has the mindset that they want to do it. They're really good at it. They can live in ambiguity, make quick decisions, all those kind of things. But also they have the time and energy and passion that brings them joy in their work lives.
Absolutely. And that ties into another point with regards to the roles, is that some folks feel that we can't do it or it's failing because we can't hire all these people. But the problem that they're running into is that they needed them to begin with. They just didn't realize it. And they had people sort of misplaced to begin with. They needed a single source of truth of prioritization. Like we said, as we started talking about this, prioritization is one of the biggest problems we wind up running into. And they said, well, we just kind of need a single source of truth. We'll have product owners and allow them to be a single source of truth. No, we can't do that. Right. And so there's this sort of dichotomy between what they really want and recognize that they need, but not willing to put the effort in giving them the space to be successful in that dedicated full-time role. That single source of truth around priority, give them the authority. That's another thing, giving them the authority to actually make calls on their products and their product areas so that they can make the decisions much, much closer to the work.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, another pattern that we've both seen is when people bolt on all of these agile roles and jobs onto the old project management roles
Right.
and jobs. And then they say, why do we have so many roles and jobs? It's like, well, you're duplicating
That's
a
right.
lot of it, where there can't be like, there's the old way of working and we're going to add this new agile thing on top of it. It's got to be, it's actually a change.
That's
It's
right.
a change. And so you might not need to hire any more bodies. You might have them, but you have to say, you know what, this role, as we've envisioned it in project management or whatever, job titles are weird because different companies use project manager to be different things.
Right.
But it's, you're moving to a new way of working. And so if you're still doing the old way of working and the new way of working, wow, that's going to be hard and really expensive because you're going to need twice as many people. And
That's
it's going to be really slow doing two, sometimes in conflicting things. And then people will often say, well, that's Agile's not working. And
that's
it's
right.
like, well, that the way you're doing it, it's not.
That's
But
right.
neither is your old way.
That's right. And one of the things that, and as I go into an organization, some of them, they will, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a company that's doing well and has money at their disposal and they want to work with us. That's wonderful. But the problem that I'll often run into as I engage with their leadership is that their first gut reaction to solving some of these problems is throw more money and people at it. Whereas what they need to do is, and this is where I wind up recommending people, just hold on. You may need to hire down the road at some point, but let's start with where you are.
Yeah.
Let's start with where you are. Let's work through that and understand that we want to get to a certain point. And then after those learnings, you can decide what you want to do from there. But they want to take from an agile ways of working and just plop it straight on top of what they've always done. And they think that that's change management. Well, we're just minimizing the amount of change that's taking place. But at the end of the day, they're just doing what a lot of people refer to as the agile fall and that kind of thing. And they have to understand, leadership has to understand there are absolute changes that have to take place that in order to go from where they are right now to a better place. Otherwise, you're just going to have the same thing, only different words and phrases and roles. And you're
Yeah.
right, it may wind up costing more money.
And when people are doing this kind of change, what I totally stole this from one of our customers, so I'm not going to name, so I can pretend I came up with it myself. Which was I was talking to him about in his organization. He said, "Think big, start small, go fast."
Yeah,
It's like you want to have a vision for your organization where you want it to be. Then you're going to say, okay, where are we going to start, and what sort of area are we going to be in, rather than trying to do it. But then key is go fast, because one of the things that we've both seen over and over is people can admire their problem. They can talk, they can spend months coming up with organizational design and operating models and all this kind of stuff. I've seen this. I've seen people spend years doing this, and then they try it and it's broken from the first thing. So start quickly, like don't wait 6 months of operating model design or whatever. Just like, okay, well, let's do just enough and start, because we're going to guess what that operating model should be.
that's right.
And we're going to be wrong. 100% guarantee you will be wrong. Let's find out how we're wrong, or how much we're wrong, in a small area as fast as possible. And so that's one of the things I really encourage. I know this is how we do it at Scrum. It's like, okay, where's the pilot? Where's the reference model
That's right.
that we're going to try things and we're going to expose all this broken stuff? But let's do it there so we're not destroying the entire organization at once. And then it's like, okay, now we have, oh, that works now. Okay, now let's replicate it. And then we can start speeding up the transformation. But it's sort of thinking big, start small, but go fast.
Yeah,
You can do this pretty quickly.
Yeah,
But
that's
understanding, you can do this initial spark, but also understanding if you're in a large organization, this is a 3 to 5 year plan.
That's right.
It's not going to happen overnight. I mean,
Right.
you can hire Bobby and I to come in, and we will get you a bunch of Scrum teams. It would take us about 2 weeks, but it is not going to transform your organization. It takes time, but you have to move quickly to learn while you have that time.
Yeah, and one of the hard parts around this that some organizations struggle with, and some people will even give up when this starts to happen, is that as that kicks off, even with a small slice within their organization, as they're kicking that off, you are, I mean, if Agile does anything, it brings to light the problems very, very quickly. Some of them have always been there. Some of them are due to the fact that we're changing, right? That's going to
Yeah.
happen. But some have always been there. And we've just kind of ignored it or swept it under the rug. And not everybody's comfortable with that. That's why that change management side of this becomes so important, but also having a comfort level with peeling off the Band-Aid and saying, look, these are things that we have to address. These are problems that have always been here. And as leadership, I know it's on my plate to find ways to be able to solve those problems in two ways: empowering others to solve problems, but also making sure that I'm giving that support, and things that have to come to me, structure, policy, things like that, that are at a higher level, hiring, those are getting addressed as well.
Yeah, I always think of the analogy of a couple of years ago, I got an electric car, right? So I had to put an EV charger in my garage. Now my house is an old house. It was built like 1915 or something. And so the guy came in and he's like, okay, first of all, we're gonna have to replace your electric box because you know this requires more power than anything else you have in your house. And by the way, some of the wiring that's in your walls is insulated with paper, like it's wrapped with paper, because that was the code in like 1930 when they put electricity in here. And I'm like, that fire hazard was always there.
Right.
I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
It was a really expensive thing to have to go fix.
Oh, goodness.
But it's like that it's like until you open up the wall and say, oh, this way we've been doing things for so long that we just we're ignorant has this huge risk to it. Well, it's definitely the fault that we opened up the wall, that's the reason the problem exists.
Yeah, just patch the wall back over.
Patch the wall back up. Let's pretend we never saw that.
Yeah, there's got to be another way. Yeah, but that, I mean, speaking of those major, adjustments and coming across things that were problems, in the beginning, one of the other things that we run into that brings a lot of that to light is when people are working to try to make that shift from project-based work to product-focused work. Because in that shift, they'll see some of those problems that had been kind of hidden from the beginning. I'll give you one example. I worked with a large insurance company that the PMO had been coming back to leadership saying that, the green, yellow, red project statuses and saying everything's green, that things are getting developed and completed, and leadership was feeling pretty good. We're on track. But once they actually started developing more of a product mindset and zeroing in on a true definition of done, they realized that things were only getting developed and nothing was getting through to a tested environment or getting feedback from people so that they could actually go to production. And they were years behind, not just days or weeks behind. They were years behind because they weren't getting that sort of transparency. And so, of course, they were angry and they were frustrated. They were thankful that they were making the transition and getting better visibility into what they were doing. But making that transition from project-based and everything that goes along with just funding projects, teams that are focused on projects, as opposed to product life cycles and truly understanding what value in the hands of a customer or stakeholder means, that's a really big adjustment. That's again, that change comes in huge.
I think that mindset is really, you hit an important point there, because if you just are setting up, this is another prophecy, said there'll be a problem and they'll set up a special team to go attack that problem. The problem will go away, the team gets dissolved, and then you have another problem. And it has to become more, your entire organization is set up these agile teams. You have backlog. It could be problems, could be opportunities, could be keeping the lights on, could be whatever. And you flow it to the teams. The example that one of our government customers brought to me was, said, okay, their travel policy is like 700 pages. And I mean, it's absurd. I mean, and no one sort of set out to, but he's like, I could go fix that travel policy.
Sure.
But the system that created it will recreate it if I don't fix the system that created it. Because that was not one person's decision to make an insane 700-page travel policy. It was little accretions over time. Oh, what about this? Oh, what about that? No one owning it as a product. Mm-hmm. Hey, what is the goal? What's the goal? It's like all this stuff. So his attitude is very much, what is the system that created something like that? Because that's just the one I know about. There are going to be others like that are totally insane too, that same system creates. And if I just create a team to fix the travel policy, The travel policy will get fixed, but it'll get recreated. And there's other policies that are just as insane that won't get fixed.
Yeah.
And so thinking much more about what is the product mindset rather
Yeah.
than a project mindset.
And it ties into what we consider value on such a heavy scale, because we'll see as we're making that transition, I see a lot of organizations will be able to have greater visibility into technical debt. And sometimes it's in the form of some sort of documentation like that. But a lot of times it's also related to their products. And because they've had projects that have been funded to maintain certain products for a long time and haven't been focused in on life cycles, then they have this massive, I mean, technical debt's like financial debt. They're not paying it down or eliminating it altogether so that they can move on and provide those funds to what's really important and where the value really lies. And so they're just continuing to fund these long-term technical debt items that they should have eliminated a long time ago. But in a product mindset, they're able to get greater visibility on what needs to go away, not just what things we're launching and what value is in new areas, but what things we need to sunset and like document like that. You know, what things do we need to change our system so that we're not continuing to add on to things that no longer provide value. We're eliminating them and then reinvesting in the most valuable areas.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, we've seen that a couple of different companies of really reinventing their tech stack, moving to the cloud. All that kind of stuff does take a lot of investment. I was talking, right as the cloud was taking up, I was talking to the Swiss bank, big one. And I was talking to some of the engineers who maintained the bank, like the technical guts of like how the bank worked. And they said, you know, really all we are HTML developers putting a wrapper on this thing that was built in COBOL that's running on mainframes underneath the mountains. And no one knows how it actually works. All those people are retired.
That's right. Then you got to hire back contractors for twice the money, right?
Yeah, and so they're like, and that motivated them. That was one of the reasons they're doing it, because they're like, well, if we keep on putting these web wrappers around this bank, we're going to break something and not know how to fix it, and hundreds of billions of dollars are going to go away if we wouldn't know how. And so it's understanding that you're not just sort of putting a wrapper around a problem, that you actually need to start taking it apart to be able to do more things that you want to do. And so technical debt can be a huge thing. It's really easy not to invest in it, because especially from a leadership point of view, it's like, you know, I just want new stuff. Well, right. You know, where's my new stuff?
Yeah,
that can be a big issue.
And that's not just even specific to technology. And so one of the conversations we have with leadership quite a bit, because, you know, a lot of this started within technology, obviously, and we kind of went into organizations throughout what I call the side door of technology, when a lot of times it is greater organizational adjustments to, you're talking about the system overall. You know, when we kind of upgrade the technology area, that's where we're starting off, there are impacts all over the place. And with our hiring, with our funding, with our operations, all of those areas, because we've done this work. And so we wind up having to have more holistic organizational conversations as opposed to just within a very specific area. And that will oftentimes tie into why people may see failures as well, because we've only focused on upgrading the engine of the car, so to speak. And we haven't realized that it's going to impact the brakes and the doors and the frame and all these other areas. And then we say, well, see, it's not going to work here because the organization doesn't start to become more agile. And this is why we've seen some companies kind of fall off, you know, from an overall visibility perspective. They weren't structured well enough internally to be able to adapt to change, not just purely in their technology area, but everybody else too.
Absolutely. And I think that we can sort of end here is that I think that one of the things about an agile transformation, it's not like you're going from one state to another state. It's not like you're going to be done. The entire point is, as you were just saying, is how do we make the organization capable of evolution, adaptation over time? Because even the perfect organization today is not going to be the right one in 6 months. As we know, the world changes fast. Both in terms of technology, in terms of pandemics, in terms of politics, in terms of everything else.
Faster now than
change. Faster now than ever. And so you have to have an organization that is, you know, not just resilient, but actually gets better because of adversity.
Right. And that's a key point right there. Better because of adversity, not hindered.
Exactly. And that's, I would say, the final thing that we maybe could adhere is that it's a mindset shift of your constant improvement. How do we get a little bit better, not just today, not just tomorrow, but forever?
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's great picking brains with.
Yeah, this is fun.
We're gonna have to do this again. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, man.
Talk to you later.